Hello and welcome, and for many, welcome back. We're glad you're here. This is session 2 of our Disabilities and Apprenticeship and Career series. And today we're going to focus on something that affects so many people, mental health and trauma-related disabilities, and what that means for apprenticeship programs. This work is brought to you through the Supply Chain Automation Workforce Hub, powered by Manhattan Strategy Group. And our goal is to help apprenticeship programs build welcoming, supportive, high-performing training environments where every apprentice can succeed. I am Robin Guafney, and I am supporting our tried and true experts, Dr. Kim Harris and Corey DiBiase. So let me give you a quick overview of what we're going to talk about in this session and our roadmap. We're going to cover what mental health related disabilities look like in an apprenticeship setting, how stigma affects apprentice engagement, what trauma-informed practices look like in rural workplaces, how to build accommodations into your program, and how to use universal design and data to strengthen retention and outcomes. In this session, we will discuss issues related to suicide and suicidal ideation. If you or others in your life need to talk, the 988 Crisis Lifeline is a vital resource. Mental health challenges are incredibly common, and more than 1 billion people globally experience them. In the US, that's around 60 million adults every year. And think about the age of the group entering apprenticeships right now, which is Gen Z, and their reported rates of anxiety and depression are even higher. And these conditions affect focus, attendance, workplace safety, and how easily someone can learn new skills. So when we support mental health, we're supporting the entire apprenticeship model. So with that, let's talk about one of the biggest barriers apprentices face, which is stigma. A lot of apprentices don't feel comfortable saying, hey, I'm having a hard time. Most of us don't feel comfortable saying, hey, I'm having a tough time with anything. Some worry they'll be seen as unreliable or not tough enough for the job. And adults with disabilities report much higher levels of mental distress. So if we ignore mental health, we end up losing great apprentices who needed just a little more support, just a little more care and understanding. So to understand where mental health fits, let's revisit the broader categories of disability that Corey introduced in part 1 of this series.
Thank you so much, Robin Guafney. For those of those of you who have tuned into these sessions in the past and you thought, that was great, that was cool, that was a lot of fun, but something missing. I can't think what's missing with this session, what's missing with this webinar that Dr. Harris and Corey just did. We figured it out. We had a Robin Guafney shaped hole in our team, and we filled it. So now we are on track. Now things are ready to go. As Robin Guafney did tell us, we did discuss this in our last session, which I hope folks got a chance to take a look at. That's our Understanding, Engaging, and Empowering People with Disabilities, part 1. So we talked about these categories. These are just kind of loose categories that we use, but we of course think about disability could fall into more of the physical or perceptual, whether that's related to mobility or our senses, vision, hearing. This could be someone who is experiencing persistent physical pain. This could be people experiencing physical disabilities temporarily for whatever reason, right? So that's kind of one broad category. Another would be more learning and developmental types of disabilities, people who learn, process, or express themselves differently. People who have developmental disabilities that impact learning, speech, etc., but which might also impact movement, perception, all those kinds of good things. And to be very clear here, as we said in the last time, we're not talking about diagnoses here. This is not, reading from the DSM kind of thing. This is just broad categories of knowing that disability can take a wide variety of different forms, and that means that the experience of people with disabilities is just as broad, just as varied as the human experience generally, right? And that is all stuff that we talked about in session one of this. Uh, but now what we're going to talk about, as Robin did introduce to us here, is more mental health and trauma-related disabilities. So mental health can be folks who are experiencing persistent or intermittent or occasional mental health-related symptoms that are likely not obvious or apparent. If you did watch our prior session, we talked about Harold who uses a wheelchair. Well, when someone uses a wheelchair, that's something which most of us just perceive right away. And that kind of simplifies things a little bit when we're thinking about how do we engage Harold in this team? How do we make sure the physical space works here? Someone can have a mental health related disability or a trauma related disability. And of course, there's nothing about what we perceive in them that we're going to immediately know that. And by the way, we don't necessarily need to know that. Accommodating disability is not about being all in everyone's business, right? This is not about needing to know every single detail of someone's situation. Just in the same way that if I said I had a persistent physical health situation, well, we might need to talk about what that means to accommodate me in the workplace. But we also know that it does not mean like, okay, look, we need to hand out Corey's medical files to everybody on staff here. No, we need to know enough to know functionally how do we support someone? How do we take full advantage of someone's place on our team here? In addition to this, it's kind of I consider trauma an aspect of mental health or an aspect of mental health related disabilities, but it is a separate category we want to talk about. This being the folks who experience a response to a traumatic event or series of events, or even multiple unrelated traumatic events long after that event has occurred. So we'll talk more about that. But folks who are still living with trauma in a sense that is a very real, very present part of their experience that is not sort of fading away in the way that we typically would hope something like that. But again, we'll talk more about that. And these are the kinds of things that this session is going to be all about. So we talked about this last time, but I do want to reiterate, I think this is very important. So what is a disability? First of all, disability is an aspect of identity. Depending on who someone is, depending on what they think about these things, this might be really, I might speak about myself as someone with a disability. This might be a really important part of my identity. I might have peer relationships. I might want to build peer relationships with other folks with disabilities, talk about that experience, the challenges, the promising aspects, the new aspects, the policy related things. In just the same way that any one of us who has an aspect of our identity, I am of Italian descent. I'm an Eagles fan. All these things we choose how much of those aspects of ourselves we put out in the world and how much of them we put out into our workplace and how much it's going to affect the social setting we're in. So that's one way that disability might be part of someone's life. Another way is just a simple functional factor. That is to say, whether it's a physical or a psychological limitation or just a factor that we need to consider about, okay, how is someone going to perform as effectively and efficiently as possible? It might be a factor that, as we said before, changes how we perceive or learn new information. Or it might be a factor that affects our emotions, our social aspects, our relationship, our social affect, and our relationships. So again, just thinking about those things functionally as well. What disability is not, however, as we said before, disability does not predict employment matching. Disability does not predict employment success. We don't say, okay, Corey has a disability. And by the way, when I speak about myself that way, I do consider myself a person with a disability, and I'll be talking more about that. But that fact, when we say that, of course, there are kind of two conclusions we can't draw from that. Okay, Corey has a disability. That means that Corey's not going to be a good fit for different kinds of employment. Well, we just don't know that, right? We also don't know that Corey might be a good fit for different kinds of employment. As we said last time, we sometimes hear we talk about folks who are on the autism spectrum, and I've heard said a number of times, like, oh, I bet they'd be great at something like programming or something involving IT that's just all about detail and precision and maybe doesn't demand as much on the social side. Well, that could be the case. I'm sure there are all kinds of folks on the autism spectrum who are succeeding in information technology, and that's great. But they're succeeding in information technology because that's what their interests are. That's where their talents are. That's where those are the kinds of jobs they want. We don't have to think about their disability in terms of how we think about what kinds of jobs they're going to have, where they're going to be successful or not. We do what we do with every other candidate, and we say, okay, Fori, what are you good at? What are you not good at? What do you like to do? What is like the worst work day you can imagine? What are you just terrible at? Think about those things. That for people with disabilities, just like for every other human being on the planet, we think about people's interests, people's talents, people's ambitions. That is how we make good job matching. We certainly do not put someone in a job or think about matching them with an employer or a registered apprenticeship on the basis of that disability, right? Might be a functional factor we think about. It is not a matching predictor. Again, we talked about this, just really important to me that we keep coming back to that idea. So let's talk a little bit about engaging and empowering people with mental health related disabilities in apprenticeship and career. Um, so a number of challenges related to mental health and employment. Robin introduced a number of these to us. Um, uh, uh, First of all, mental health disabilities seldom as obvious to outside observers as a physical disability might be. We just don't see it, right? Um, so we're not going to imagine or sort of immediately think about accommodations or how to incorporate this into someone's work life because we just don't know that it's there. Now, that could be good and that could be bad. In some cases, folks do not want to have this be a conversation that they're having in the workplace. For some folks, they're accommodating it on their own and they don't want to be part of this. Okay, that's fine. But we still, of course, need to foster an environment where we are open to and able to accommodate folks with all different kinds of disabilities. Mental health related disabilities are often intermittent or occasional, right? This is not a every day is the same way. If we talked about Harold last time, Harold who uses a wheelchair. Well, Harold using a wheelchair, probably, now that might be temporary, but in many, many cases, that's going to be just the status quo. That's part of Harold's identity. That's how Harold accesses the physical world around him. Okay, great. Mental health issues ebb and flow. Some days are going to be really difficult, other days not so much. It's going to be affected by extrinsic things happening from the outside. It's going to be affected by things happening on, quote unquote, on the inside, right? So there can be a lot of changes, which of course makes this a little more complex to accommodate, a little more complex to think about, because the disability itself will change and evolve and shift and ebb and flow and all that kind of good stuff. Mental health disabilities, this is true of all disability, right? This is not, disability is not a separate factor. Mental health disabilities are woven into every other aspect of our identity, every other aspect of our psychology. I experience depression and anxiety to a very large extent. Well, when I am not managing that the way I need to, that of course can affect my personal relationships because I'm going to draw away from people. I'm going to say, oh, you know what? I don't want to be impeding this team, or I just can't be part of this social interaction right now. So I'm going to back off, and I'm going to back off, and I'm going to back off, and I'm going to back off. But what's going to happen eventually, right, is that my backing off based on I'm struggling with a disability right now, eventually is going to start alienating the people around me just because I'm not in touch with them, not because they don't like someone with a disability. They don't want to think about just because I'm withdrawing as a sort of a natural self-protection. Well, if I withdraw long enough, if I don't ever send an email to Robin or Kim and say, hey, how you guys doing? What's going on, folks? Well, eventually, right, I'm going to just kind of end up alienating myself. Well, that's one example of how, again, this is just enmeshed with my reality of the way I live my life. And of course, once if I do end up alienating myself, well, of course, we can predict the kind of impact that's going to have on my ongoing mental health. That's not going to make it easier for me to accommodate my mental health in the long term. So just always thinking about those kinds of pieces. Mental health, as Robin said, associated with complex, typically intense kinds of stigma. People are very, and this might be changing, and I'm really, really happy about that. Needless to say, we have a generation coming up who does not have, if you'll excuse my putting it this way, does not have the hangups of graybeards like myself, right? That are much more open in talking about these things, and I couldn't be happier about that. I think that's great news. But of course, there is a great deal of hesitancy to discuss mental health and to request accommodations. For me to walk into a workplace and say, hey, I know it's my first day here, but just wanted to let everybody know that I really struggle with this and it might be a part of your working with me. Folks don't have background information on that. That can, of course, make just be very complicated to discuss. And we still, unfortunately, do hear folks continuing to report harassment due to mental health related issues. And again, that can come from a number of different directions. That can be purely malicious in some cases, but I think in a lot of cases that might be there could be misunderstandings, lack of information that are fueling that as well. And as we said before, mental health disabilities may be due to intrinsic or extrinsic factors. Invariably, they're all woven in together. Whatever is going on for me in any given moment, that's going to affect my social interactions. That's going to affect the way I build relationships. The way I build relationships then is going to come back around and have an effect on my mental health. So there is just a very complex web of factors that are constantly interplaying to affect someone's life in this situation. Now, when we're supporting folks with mental health related concerns, here's some things we're not ever going to do. We do not speculate on or attempt to diagnose the mental health status of a colleague, an employee, an apprentice. Whatever our intentions, that's not what we do. We don't think, I bet that person X feels this way, and I recognize that we don't do that. That is not our business. We look to the person. I look to Robin. I say, Robin, you tell me, you describe your mental health to me. You describe your needs to me. I am not going to impose my assumptions on you from the outside. Now, on the flip side of this, we do not ignore a colleague who seems to be in crisis. We don't say, well, I can tell that Kim is really struggling today, but I don't want to be intrusive. That's Kim's business. I'll just act like everything's fine and I'll just ignore this. So, of course, we offer the opportunity of support, of connection, of understanding. We do really weird things like say, hey, Kim, how are you today? How you doing, Kim? How's work going? How's life going? How's your mom in there? Well, whatever. We just ask those kinds of questions. It's a matter of basic, simple human connection, right? And then that gives Kim the opportunity to tell me what her experience is, not have me tell her. Of course, next one here, we don't require details or diagnoses. If I'm a supervisor and one of my staff comes to me and says they're struggling with something, I don't say, okay, well, you tell me what your diagnosis is. Show that to me in the DSM, whatever number DSM we're on here. Let me see a note from your psychiatrist. No. If we leave it to the person to describe things to us, we leave it to them to tell us what they need to tell us, what they want to tell us, functionally, what do they need? But in just the same way, if one of my staff came to me and said, Corey, I'm going to need Thursday off because I have a doctor's appointment, I'd say, okay, well, that's fine, but I will need to know. So is there a specific something you're going in? Are there invasive exams that you're going to have done? You're going to get an x-ray done. I want to see that x-ray. We would never ask those things, right? Well, we never ask those. We don't need to engage in those details. We let the person tell us what's going on. And very importantly, we never ever silence a staff-led discussion around mental health issues. If our people, if our staff, if our apprentices, if our mentors, if our leadership are talking about these issues in a constructive and positive way. Now, of course, if someone is being destructive, if someone is being judgmental or hurtful, well, that's not a discussion, right? That's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about, okay, a group of folks are getting together and talking about the realities of being employees with mental health related disabilities. That's great. We leave that space open for them. We put a little check in place to make sure that nothing hopeful is happening. In terms of just folks having these discussions, we encourage that, we allow that, we let folks lead in that direction as they want to do. Some other things we can do, good stuff to be doing to support folks with mental health related disabilities. First and foremost, employees must know they're safe in raising mental health concerns, seeking accommodation, asking questions. I try and make a habit of talking about the fact that that depression and anxiety are a part of my life. Now, I should say I don't consider these huge parts of my life. I know there are folks who have much more significant versions of what I experience. But I make a point of talking about it, not because I was like, well, I need this or I need that. I make a point of talking about it because I want folks around me to know that if they're feeling the same way or they're feeling something else entirely, well, you know what? If there's stigma around that, if that's a difficult conversation to have, so be it. We can start with me. We can talk about my experience, and hopefully that will help other folks feel comfortable. But in addition to just the general atmosphere of the workplace, we want policies in place that are available to all staff and that are frequently discussed. We want to know how we talk about these things, what things are acceptable and what things aren't. Again, when we're doing harm, that is not acceptable. That is not a discussion. That is doing harm. But having discussions, being open and raising concerns, we always want to encourage that, and we want that codified in policy. We want to know what resources are out there. If we have an employee assistance program, if there are resources in the communities, if there is a crisis response, that 988 number that Robin brought up, so important when we're talking about these issues, so important when we're talking about trauma, so important when we're talking, of course, about suicidal ideation. If there are internal staff groups, anything like that, we want to make sure that folks know about these resources and that these are presented as like, hey, this is right there for you. You should be using these things the way you use public transit or the way you use the road system to get to work. It's something you need. It's something you depend on. Use it. Great. No one's going to judge you for taking the train to work. No one's going to judge you for taking the bus. No one's going to judge you for availing yourself of this mental health related resource because, hey, it's what you need. You need a piece of equipment to be more efficient using your computer. Great. You need some support around mental health. Great. Whatever makes you more comfortable, more efficient, more engaged, more connected, we are all for it. And of course, these are messages we want to talk about this a lot, and we want to talk about this in different ways. We want to make sure that no one is in doubt that this is how we feel about these things. Now, when we're talking about specific accommodations, because mental health is such a varied and varying experience, because every day is going to be a little bit different when it comes to mental health related issues. That means, again, it's not going to be as simple as saying, well, we'll put this piece of physical equipment in place like we did for Harold and everything will be fine. No, we're going to need to be more flexible. We're going to need to be comfortable with the fact that we can't always predict what someone is going to need, but we will be able to figure that out. Um, uh, so we want there to be flexibility. We want there to be control. I want my staff, I want myself to be able to dictate what do I need. I want to be able to have the control to be able to go out and get it and to say what kind of support I need in what way and in what circumstances. And that can be as simple as the ability to take some time off if I need it under whatever the policy of the company is. It doesn't need to be special. Corey gets special time off. No, or we just have time off. And we accept Corey saying, this is just not a good day for me to come into the office. I'll be back around tomorrow and we'll go from there. That is perfectly acceptable. We don't, again, need a lot of additional details, but we also have some breaks. If our job allows for it, we have some work from home kind of scenarios, all that kind of good stuff. We want there to be standard protocols for accommodation requests that, again, are frequently discussed. We don't put up a poster and say you can request accommodations and just trust that that message will get out there. We talk about this a lot. We keep coming back to it because the more we talk about it, the more we give voice to it, the more clear we make it that, no, this is not something that is going to get you fired. This is not something that's going to get you ostracized. This is not something that's going to get everybody kind of looking nervously at you. It's just life. This is just life, and because work is a part of our lives, a gargantuan part of our lives for most of us, right? Well, we want to be sure that we're thinking about these aspects of life and incorporating them in the way we manage folks, engage folks, and in the way we support folks. Now, trauma. Again, I think most folks would agree. Trauma is an aspect of mental health, but it's kind of a particular piece, and it's something we want to drill into a little bit. And there's a lot more to say about this. We're really going to be skimming the surface, but I highly recommend. There are some great trauma-informed resources out there. University of Buffalo has a great trauma. Buffalo, New York has a great trauma-informed center that just has the best information. Some of it really straightforward infographics, or if you want to read a 50-page research report, they're going to have it in there too. So check them out, great stuff. But just to think sort of broadly about this, trauma is the result of a dangerous or damaging event, a traumatic event, creates a lasting response. People who've experienced violence, an accident, or a damaging or undermining relationship, these are folks who have experienced trauma. Folks may have experienced trauma from multiple different sources over the course of their lives. And actually, experiencing trauma once, having trauma that is very much a part of our experience, that's going to make us more susceptible to trauma in the future. So if I had a traumatic event when I was a teenager, and I had another when I was in my 30s, well, that one in my 30s is probably going to be even more impactful because these things kind of build up. And though we may commonly associate trauma with the experience of violence or of homelessness or of incarceration or of domestic violence or of military service, um, uh, and all those things may very well include trauma. Some of them, I mean, homelessness, as a person who had experienced homelessness for an extended period of time, told me, Corey, homelessness does not include trauma. Homelessness is trauma, right? So we know that all of those kinds of experiences might include trauma, but any one of us may have and likely will have experienced traumatic events, and our responses to that and what continues to be factors for us will continue to stick with us for sure, even though they very often will express themselves and present themselves in different ways. So what do we do here? How do we support folks? We first of all provide support to all staff and leadership. We want there to be trauma-related training and information in our organization. We want there to be training on trauma-related approaches that we require for our leadership. We require for anyone who's going to be a supervisor. We require of folks in HR. We require of someone who's going to be a mentor. If I'm going to be a mentor to someone who is transitioning out of incarceration or out of homelessness or out of the military, whatever their experience might have been, I need to understand trauma. I want to build a connection with someone the way a mentor needs to do. I need to understand trauma to do that. So have we made this available? And I prefer required for someone who's going to be in these kinds of situations. We always want to be considering re-traumatization. How are we collecting information from staff? How are we conducting sensitive conversations? How are we designing our physical spaces? Now, I'm a big guy, big gestures, big voice. You can see that. Well, that comes with a number of consequences when we think about trauma. First of all, there are going to be people who are inherently not comfortable with me. Now, I'm not always this is not how I talk all the time. And my wife is very thankful for that. But I'm never a small presence. I'm never kind of a guy that you walk into a room and you don't notice me. I always take up space. And there's nothing wrong with that. But for some people, my presence will be uncomfortable. And that's not a personal judgment on me. That's not someone saying, oh, I don't like Corey. But as a supervisor, I need to think about that. And I need to think about okay, if someone's going to be my supervisee and they're not comfortable with me, well, we need to talk with them about what will make this work. Or do we need to just find should there be a different supervisory relationship in place? Same thing with mentors. Same thing with any of these kinds of relationships that we want to start building. We need to think about our own effect on other people. But this comes with another impact as well. I might not be all that when I drive into the office, I park in the back lot, and we're way up north here in Montana, and the sun doesn't come up till a little later, and it goes down a lot sooner. It might not bother me at all that I walk through a dark parking lot. I walk into a dark office. I gotta try to snake around a couple different cubicles and get here and there. And there might be some areas where that are for to see, and that might not bother me at all. All of that might be fine. Someone else might have a very different experience of that. And needless to say, we do not. We've got to listen to folks' own experiences. We've got to be listening to folks who have these experiences to explain to us what is going to make this the most safe, most welcoming, most engaging environment they can be in. And when we talk about re-traumatization, that is essentially the experience of bringing back that the feeling of the trauma, not as a memory, but almost like we are putting someone back in the position where they were when they first had the traumatic event. So that's what we're trying to avoid here, is putting someone in that situation where they're essentially re-experiencing the traumatic event. Well, one of the ways that we might very unintentionally do that, but for our case managers out there, for our job coaches out there, for our supervisors out there, I might ask Robin, so, hey, you mentioned to me that you had this traumatic experience. Can you tell me about it? I might do that because I'm trying to get information and be more supportive of him. But guess what? One of the most common ways to create re-traumatization is to ask someone to relive that experience, to tell me about that experience. And for someone who has experienced trauma, it might not be as simple as telling a story. That might mean reliving that experience in a way that, of course, we do not want to do. So, again, we talked about the physical spaces and just being very open-minded that what might not bother me at all might be more difficult for someone else. Our interactions with people, the person who I am might be difficult for someone to build a relationship with. Well, it's on us then to accommodate that and think about how we're going to get around that. And the number one way, the best way that we can always do that is to ensure that we are always taking the time to answer these questions for ourselves and to empower all staff to provide feedback on what is working, what doesn't, what makes them uncomfortable, what makes them feel like they do not belong here, what makes someone feel unsafe in this moment. We need always to be listening to folks who have had these experiences so they can tell us, they can guide us. And needless to say, we need to, first of all, make sure that folks know they are safe in bringing those experiences and expressions to us. But more to the point, we need to know that we need folks to know that we are depending on you to tell us how to make this registered apprenticeship program, how to make this company, how to make this organization as welcoming, engaging, and safe as possible for everyone. We need your leadership to tell us how to do this. We need you to tell us what you need so that you always feel that sense of safety and engagement. Continuing with this, there is no such thing as a quote unquote cure for trauma. There's no such thing as a perfect accommodation for trauma. However, the closest we get is control, giving people control. If I feel out of control in a situation, my anxiety is going to go up. And that's not just some special thing about Corey, right? That is any one of us. If I cannot control my physical environment, if I cannot control when I take a break, if I cannot control who I work with and when and under what circumstances, then all of that is going to make me much more susceptible to re-traumatization. So we want to ensure that people know, like, if we are unintentionally putting you in a position where you are feeling these kinds of concerns, we need to make sure that we can support and accommodate all of that. And this is all, again, part of ensuring that people come to us and share their experiences with us. We need that to learn from. We also need that to instill in them the notion that, yes, you are supported. Yes, you are accommodated in this situation. And then finally, this is an area where, once again, we can have groups, we can have informal or formal groups in our organization that are talking about these issues, considering these issues, considering how we get better with them. And just like with any one of these kinds of groups, we want this to be leadership supported, but staff led, right? We want leadership to say, hey, there is a space for you, that you are welcome to have these conversations as long as they are safe and healthy and constructive. But also, we're not going to tell you how to do it. We're going to give you the space and we're going to let you construct these conversations in a way that is most beneficial to you. Now, finally, we're going to talk about this. Of course, a very difficult subject for folks, and of course, anyone who is struggling with these issues, anyone who has folks in their lives who may be struggling, we always provide information on the 988 Suicide and Crisis Lifeline, a fantastic resource. Make sure we know about that. But a couple of things we want to keep in mind here, and this is particularly pertinent to me. I'm someone who, when I was first learning about these things, I always assumed like, hey, I'm not an expert. The last thing I want to do is ask a question that might open up a difficult conversation that I'm not equipped to support someone in. Well, if we are truly worried that a colleague or a mentor or a mentee or a supervisor or whoever else is struggling on this level, we must ask them about it. We must ask if someone is okay. We must let them know that we care about them. We care about their well-being. This is not intrusive. If someone truly is experiencing suicidal ideation, if they are in that place, which for those of us who have been in that place, we know there's really nothing like it. There's no way to convey what that is like, what that experience is like. We need to be able to reach out to them. But the thing to remember is when we bring that up to someone who's in that situation, I'm just going to put it glibly, we're not going to make things worse. Things are already, for that individual, they're already about as bad as they can get. They feel about as bad as they can get, even if they actually aren't. The feelings there are, someone's in a point of crisis. We're not going to make things worse by asking if someone is okay. On the flip side, if I'm worried about Robin and it turns out, well, no, she was just distracted and thinking about something else, but she's actually fine. Well, I'm not going to put her in a position of suddenly being in that spot because I brought it up, because I said, hey, Robin, you're my friend. I care about you. Or is everything going well? That's not harm. That's good, right? We want to always be doing that. But the reason I emphasize this so much is that my tendency is always to think, oh, geez, I better not get in someone's business. I better not be intrusive. I better not start a conversation that I don't know how to navigate. We're not asking you to provide psychological care to someone. We're asking you to show that you care about someone. That's all this is. And open up that conversation. And once again, just show that these conversations are okay, not only okay to have, they are necessary to have. And of course, these are things that these are things that we can provide staff training on. We can provide resources. We can provide ongoing forums for discussion as well. Um, uh, some great stuff here. Again, we talked in the last session about how we want to always be providing information to our staff. We don't want staff having to depend on assumptions or preconceived notions. So it's always great to be offering these kinds of trainings related to mental health, trauma, suicidal ideation. Again, we talked about this last time. The intent here is always to normalize. The intent here is always to say, hey, we're all just people. We're all just people who have barriers and concerns and challenges and crises and happiness and joy and engagement and connection. We're all just human beings, just making it through life here. And we don't need to think about folks who experience mental health issues as being in this separate class of people. No, they're just folks, just like the rest of us. And some great kinds of resources here that we might look at. MakeTheConnection.net is a fantastic website. Very veteran and military heavy in many cases, but I think that's great. Some of those stories are just fantastic for anyone to want to hear, but a lot of personal stories you'll see there. And then when we just think about accommodations, we talked last time about the Job Accommodations Network. Ask Jan, always good resources there as well. And then finally, and I mentioned this last time, and I'm not going to go on about it because I'm taking up way too much of our time here. But if we're good at this, if we're good at hiring, retaining, and promoting people with disabilities, physical disabilities, intellectual disabilities, mental health related disabilities, trauma related disabilities, if we are good at that, that means we're a better organization than we would be otherwise. We're better at supporting everyone. We're better at being a service provider to everyone, to our customers. We're going to be better. We're going to be better at constructing teams. We're going to be more creative and thoughtful in terms of how we engage and support our staff. Doing this well makes our organization, our company, our registered apprenticeship, our organization better every time. So this is not just about supporting one group of people. This is about us being better organizations all the way throughout. And to continue to talk about how to make us all better, who better than my friend, Dr. Kimberly Harris? Dr. Kimberly Harris, please take it away.
Thank you so much, Corey. And everything, I was literally leaning into every word because you're absolutely right. If you were with us in part one of this conversation, you know that we have been stressing with full intentionality the fact that while some of these things that we're talking about, we are recommending all of these things. While some of these things that we are talking about might require you to lean in a different way or to, let's face it, allocate resources up front, maybe that initially you hadn't thought about what they yield down the road in the short run, the mid run, the long run, all of it, what they ultimately yield is something that is just magnitudes greater than what you will invest. Like what Corey said, I think he said so beautifully, is the intentionality of being mindful of how we create space for everyone to show up and bring their best selves, their authentic selves into the workplace. It creates opportunity, not just for the folks that we say we are prioritizing in that moment. It creates opportunity for the team. It creates viability and shored up going concern. It creates a more competitive and successful organization. And so we've talked about the why, we've talked about the who, and as we always wrap up these conversations with, we're going to talk a little bit about the how, and that is the evaluation component, talking specifically about ensuring the outcomes reflect our intent. And if you've been with us, we always start by thinking about this process, this formula of grounding on intent. And what does that mean? To have intent, intentional about what? So defining what success is like in each of these domains, from recruitment and outreach to onboarding and training to different elements of performance and different indicators. So defining that success, co-creating that plan, evaluating that plan, and then learning from it, and just kind of backpedaling, or not back. That sounds like we're regressing, but just revisiting the co-creation component. Corey has done such an amazing job of talking about why it's essential that in every walk in this journey, we do that alongside the priorities that we are prioritizing. So if we're talking about veterans, if we're talking about individuals with disabilities, if we're talking about women, where it's some or all of those. We don't make these decisions. We don't go and we don't endeavor to do this work with thinking about them being the only thing. We do this work with them in the room, and to the extent possible. And really, it's not something that's a far-fetched proposition. We do them at the helm. We do this work with those populations, with those team members, with those individuals with that lived experience. We do that work with them at the helm, because we know that insight that they provide is so essential. It is the stuff that is going to ensure that there is alignment with what we intend and what we actually get on the outcome side of things. So as we talk about the data and we think about, all of the elements in this process, thinking about who do we invite in to help us to ideate and co-create, who's leading up the effort as we think about, implementation and design and all of the different aspects of this work. The data is just as important. And there are three things that I really want us to consider: the scalability component, the sustainability component, and the viability component. What are we talking about? So as we break down the learning and think about all of the different sources of data, the data collection process itself, and what the data tells us, we need to have a particular purpose in mind. Remember when we first started these conversations several webinars ago, our conversation centered around where do we look for potential candidates? How do we ensure that the demographic data that in the most part we're compelled to collect, how does that help us to push our apprenticeship agenda forward? What does successful outreach look like in recruitment and all the things? Then we were able to mine down deeper in this process, and now we're having specific targeted conversations as it pertains to particular priority groups in these three facets. Thinking about scaling our operations, scaling our initiatives, scaling our efforts to really encompass the entirety of our community. If you recall in the beginning in those webinars that we had several webinars back, when we kept emphasizing that drumbeat around, we want to ensure that our workforce within our organizations really mirror and align the communities that they're servicing and the communities that engage with us, right? And so this is just the next dimension in that process. So we want to make sure that we have data that enables us to scale effectively. We want to make sure that we have data that also enables us to sustain the elements and aspects of the program and initiative that work so we can have that sustainability component. And then we want data that ensures that the overall program itself is around. So it's viable, it's thriving, and it's growing. And so we need to be mindful, as Corey had mentioned a few slides ago, that this is something then that we cannot do in a silo. We do this work not only thinking about the populations that we're prioritizing, but being guided by them, having their voice and having their wisdom in the room. So this notion of universal design, by now you've heard us talk about this several times. You've heard us talk about this universal design, what it impacts and what is done for keeping in mind with intentionality the most marginalized of community members, oftentimes has amazing, tremendous positive spillover effects for all of us, right? Corey talked about the curve cuts where, yes, it's something that will enable individuals whose mobility is solely that of a wheelchair to be able to, access a curve safely without injuring themselves. But also those same curb cuts are also super helpful for individuals with strollers and individuals on bikes and individuals who are, carrying around that luggage, as Corey mentioned. So when we think of universal design, we're thinking about if you focus on those, the benefits of that focus are going to impact us all. So as Corey also mentioned, and we talked about, if you recall, in the previous webinar, that when we're talking about this notion of targeted universalism, we're talking about it from in our physical space, but also in our learning spaces as well. So it could be, that example that Corey lifted up around the multiple modalities of learning, the multiple means of action and expression, the multiple modalities for engagement, spaces, aisles, and things that are well lit, that so the individuals who are visually impaired can be able to navigate wider corridors so that individuals who need wheelchairs can utilize those, but that tend to also be super helpful for all of us. So things that oftentimes the investment, it may not be a fiscal investment, or it might, but what it yields is tremendously huge in terms of how it invites all of us to be more present, to be less encumbered, and to be able to contribute in a more effective way. And then as we wrap up this part of our discussion, we just want to be mindful of the fact that, number one, there are additional webinars to come. And we also want to just stress the fact that the things that we're talking about, yes, we are lifting up with intentionality individuals with disabilities. We're also we'll be talking about in the next set of webinars, veterans. But a lot of the things that we are talking about have applicability across the board, because what we're really talking about is really creating spaces that invite us to be more present, to be able to be unencumbered, but they also are spaces that show that intentionality is present, that are welcoming spaces, right? And so these are the things that we definitely want to be mindful of. So from an evaluation standpoint, if you were present in that previous set of webinars that we did and part one of this set of in this webinar series, we talked about the fact that documenting the process is ever so important. Consulting with individuals with lived experience is a super essential, and ensuring that that information is integrated into the evaluation and that all that comes from that, we utilize that as learning to inform next steps. So we definitely appreciate an opportunity to stress these things, to continue to lift them up, introduce new things for consideration. And as we walk along this journey, to really be mindful of the fact that as we are conceptualizing what does it mean to create these spaces, we are also answering questions that have such tremendous implications in a positive way for our entire organization. And as always, as we round out this particular webinar, we invite you, please check out the newsletters that we are generating that tell you what we're doing and who we're doing it with, where we are in this country doing this work. Please don't hesitate to reach out to Corey DiBiase at his website. At his email address. And Corey, if you do have a website, I'm sure he wouldn't mind sharing that as well. Also, you can reach out to me at my email address, Kimberly N. Harris at aducaconsulting.co. And if you have any questions, curiosities, please don't hesitate to just reach out with general inquiries at the SCA Workforce Hub website. We are keeping that updated with all of the things that we're doing, all of the learnings that are evolving and bubbling up, and just all of the things, all of the good things that we want to share about this work that we're doing in the apprenticeship space. So with that being said, we just want to thank you for being with us for this particular installment, and we hope to see you at the next installment of webinars.